I'm joined for a regular chat at this time of the week with Miatta Fahnbulleh, Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation, where we mull over economics for obvious reasons. That's why we would be doing it. Good afternoon to you, Miatta.
Good afternoon.
Well, big sort of business and economics and job story today is the announcement of that Kickstart scheme by the government for 16 to 24-year-olds, or some 16 to 24-year-olds. The big criticism coming through both from the FSB, the Federation of Small Businesses, and many of my callers, actually, who own and run small businesses, is that it needs to be open to them as well, directly.
Yeah, I mean, look, so I think the intent behind the scheme is the right one. I think the government is completely right to want to focus on young people because, you know, the numbers are quite staggering. There are over 500,000 young people under the age of 24 that are already on universal credit. We're expecting another 700,000 kids leaving education this year. And we know that the job market is pretty tough. So they're right to act. And I think the two issues with this scheme is accessibility, so making it as accessible as possible for small businesses and different types of organizations to use, but also the scale of it. You know, they've put aside 2 billion, which is a good start, but those numbers of, you know, potential youth unemployment that we're talking about, it's not clear that even this intervention is big enough to start creating opportunities and long-lasting opportunities for these young people.
What came through on the calls when I talked about this in the second hour of the programme, I think it was, yes it was, in the second hour of the programme, was how many really very small businesses wanted to avail themselves of this, but they wanted to keep their autonomy. They didn't want to be tagged onto a big business as they saw it, so that they could get involved in this. I mean, is there an obvious reason why the Treasury might have excluded them?
No, I mean, this is a sort of long-standing thing with the Treasury. So if you think about the government's apprenticeship levy and its apprenticeship scheme, it tends to target bigger companies just because it's easier, quite frankly, to administer. But that misses a huge opportunity because small businesses are big employers. And the thing that you need to try and work out is what's your infrastructure that makes it easy for small businesses to use the scheme and to adapt the scheme, any scheme, in a way that kind of works for them. And I think this is a trick, and I suspect it's one that, you know, the government will come back to, because it's, you know, madness if there are companies that can create opportunities for young people that you're not facilitating that. So, you know, I think this is their kind of first step into it. They've used the sort of model they've used in the past for other things like apprenticeships, but they will very quickly see that they're kind of missing quite a big trick here, and I suspect will adapt in time.
Let's talk about tax. There was talk earlier in the week, wasn't there, about what tax rises we might get and when. What's your sense of that particular picture?
Well, so I definitely don't think this is the time for the government to be engaging in what we call fiscal consolidation. So whether that's tax rises or spending cuts, you know, we are at the precipice of a massive economic crisis. We're barely, you know, in the depths of it, let alone coming out of it. And the idea that you would essentially put any constraints on trying to boost the economy at this time, I think, is complete madness. And, you know, interestingly, the Treasury itself seems to be rolling back on some of the briefing that was done by who knows on this. But, you know, there is a bigger question that at some point we will have to come back to, you know, how we tax fairly in order to, you know, both pay for the things that we're having to pay for now, but, you know, to pay for a better social settlement coming out of the pandemic. And for me, wealth tax is a no-brainer. You know, it makes absolutely no sense that, you know, someone that's earning 100K, if they are earning it through income, PAYE, essentially pay 40K tax. If they're earning it through dividends, they pay 30K tax. If they're earning it through capital gains, they pay 20K tax. It's a strange anomaly in the tax system, particularly when you factor in...
The more assets you have, the less tax you pay on those assets.
Basically. And wealth inequality is now the biggest driver of inequality in the country. So it's incredibly strange that that's a system that we have. It's not really fair, and it doesn't really make any economic logic to me. So I think the government is right to look at wealth taxes as part of the way of raising the revenue that it needs to. But the other way that it does that is by getting the economy going. Because if you can kickstart businesses, if you can create jobs, that generates revenue. And it cannot and it must not do anything that depresses that endeavour at this point.
Yeah, I wonder whether you think, given that this is a Conservative government that we have, do you think that the jolt that COVID has been, and what it's meant, Rishi Sunak has had to, the choices he's had to make were not choices he would have made, any Conservative Chancellor would have made. Has it been a big enough jolt for the kind of wealth taxation changes that you've just talked about to be more likely from a Tory Chancellor?
I think definitely. And I think it's both the job, but also the fact that, public opinion and the polling on this is quite clear. It's popular. People think that we should, close this anomaly. There is huge amounts of kind of public opposition to the idea of, taxing wealth. And even businesses will say, actually, there is a logic in sort of increasing taxes when everyone has suffered through this pandemic. So I think it is shifting. But, it's clear that the government is wrestling, between what's needed in this moment and old ideology. There is clearly tussles that are happening within the Conservative Party. I hope in the end, reason stands out and the government recognises the scale of the thing that we're confronting and facing and acts in the way that makes most common sense to, the majority of people.